Hey everyone, and welcome to another video. Today I'm going to be talking about my first impressions on Inio Asano's most recent work, Dead Demons, Dededede Destruction. Currently being released in English by Viz Media, and probably one of the more anticipated titles for Asano fans, especially now that Goodnight Punpun is over. This is really his only major work that we had yet to see in English, so I think it's been a long time coming. So my initial thoughts on this series are that I think it's a pretty good entry into Asano. Asano writes his manga with very particular themes and tones, and sort of handles a lot of subjects that are maybe not always handled in manga. So a lot of his series can be very heavy in that you have to be in a very particular mood to be reading. Goodnight Punpun is regarded as sort of his magnum opus, but it is like it's a hard read. It's not something I would necessarily uh, recommend to everybody. You have to be in a very particular mindset. And whilst this still has levels of typical Asano-ness, it is a lot more subdued compared to both the like Goodnight Punpun and like A Girl on the Shore and some of his other titles. I would liken the Destruction more so to Solanin than his other titles, which does make it a little bit easier to get into. This particular series follows a high school girl, uh, Kadode. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. And her friends, but mostly her, it centralizes around pretty typical, is pretty bored and unimpressed with life, as majority of Asano protagonists tend to be. The only difference is she lives in a modern day Tokyo that 3 years previously was invaded by aliens. There is this overlooming sort of spacecraft as a constant threat, but despite aliens sort of existing and being at the forefront of people's minds, people and humanity have just sort of gotten on with life. They're no longer really afraid of this alien threat. And so for her, it's really a disappointment that even the most absurd things can become mundane, everyday parts of life so quickly and without really changing anything. Karore, her family situation is again pretty typical for an Asano piece. It's not exactly a functional family relationship. Her best friend, whilst having a bit more structure to her family, also has its problems. And all of the characters, like majority of Asano characters, are very twisted in a realistic way. Nobody's truly good or bad. They've all got their little things that people probably wouldn't approve of, as well as things that they do that people would like congratulate them for. Um, there's a lot of areas of gray when it comes to Asano, and this series, despite being his sort of attempt at a more laid back slice of life series, still fits very well within his general style and tone. Uh, Artwork is exactly as you expect from Asano. Backgrounds tend to be, the digital retracing of photographs or digital manipulation of photographs. His characters range everywhere from like incredibly childlike looking to pretty weary adults. My one gripe I would say is that the teenagers, especially our main character who is on the front here, does look very young, like very young. She's meant to be a third year in high school, which is, 17, 18, depending on where your birthday falls, which I mean, 17-year-olds are juvenile looking a lot of the time, but I find that Asuna has drawn her and her friends as well in the same sort of way he drew like Pun Pun and his friends in their actual childhood. Um, yeah, so when it tackles this issue of her romantic crush on their teacher, who's 20 odd years older than her, or I don't know how old he is, but it really is like jarring at the difference, and maybe that's the point, because it does, in her youthfulness, it does betray like the immaturity of teens, but at the same time it's still like, I think he could draw them looking a little bit older and not like still have that point come across. Maybe that's just me. It is just part of his style, very round faces, big eyes. But yeah, that would be my personal gripe with it, but fundamentally and sort of foundationally, the art style is, very indicative of his typical work. It's probably better than ever. This is his most recent title. It is ongoing in Japan. I think there's 4 or 5 volumes out so far. I'm not exactly sure, so don't quote me on that. But it is one that I think this will be a lot easier for people to get into compared to the more recent of his titles released in English, at least. Goodnight Pun Pun, as I said, is great, but it does take a very particular mindset to read, and it does leave sort of a upsetting and overwhelmingly despairing aftertaste to it. It is very like nihilistic in how, I mean, as all of his works are, but overwhelmingly so. It sort of removes any source of hope by the end, which is a pretty defeatist way to look at life, personally, I would say. But and also like Girl on the Shore or Girl by the Shore, that's as well like a very hard thing to recommend to people unless they know exactly what they're going into, which I don't necessarily think that people do unless they've done like some background research into it. This is a better work to start with if you've never experienced any asana. This and Solanin I would regard as much more generally friendly and less overwhelmingly depressing. Uh, which I'm not saying everything has to be, happy and carefree all the time, but it's nice to have a moderate balance between hope and despair. Otherwise, you sort of become bored of it, or you always need more and more and more, which, I mean, is one of the points I think that a lot of asana titles make, is that you can, and this one in particular, you can get used to anything once given enough experience with it. And so you do have to keep a balanced mindset when it comes to these things. Would I recommend this? I'm sure everyone who is already an Asano fan has already picked it up and have probably already shared their thoughts on it. If you've never tried an Asano work, I would recommend this one to start, either that or Solanin. And if you're looking for something a little bit different in your manga, this might be one that you want to pick up, because I mean, there's no question as to why Asano is so well renowned. He is a very interesting, very artistic, and like takes a lot of risks with his manga, and I think that's refreshing. But the general themes are pretty typical for a lot of Japanese media. Not anime and manga so much, but if you've read any sort of literature from Japan from the past century, these same themes crop up. So it is, I think, indicative of sort of a societal and cultural acceptance within Japan. So if that sort of thing interests you, then maybe give this one a try. But I do think this is a solid first volume, especially. I will definitely be buying more. If you're an Asano fan, like I said, I'm sure you're already buying it, you already read it, and you already love it. If you're not, then this is maybe one to look into. It's a solid starting point that will probably give you a pretty clear indication of whether you'll enjoy more of his works rather than jumping straight into the, you know, wide range of stories that he's already put out. So those were my first impressions on Dead Demons Dededede Destruction, Volume 1 by Inio Asano. Yeah, really strong license by Viz, and I'm looking forward to more. Catch you in the next video, guys. Bye till then.